The boy was trying to sell the last thing his father had ever left him. He didn't know the man walking toward him could have bought 1,000 guitars without ever asking the price. He didn't know that the stranger standing in front of him was one of the most recognizable singers on earth. And he certainly didn't know that, within minutes, he would be looking into the eyes of the man his father had spent years listening to. All the boy knew was that his family needed money. And that old guitar had become something he could no longer afford to keep. It was a warm afternoon in Los Angeles. Cars rolled through the crowded streets. People hurried along the sidewalks. Conversations mixed with the sound of traffic, distant horns and footsteps. Nobody seemed to notice the little boy sitting quietly near the edge of the street. He was around 9 or 10 years old. Beside him sat an old acoustic guitar. It wasn't beautiful in the way expensive guitars were beautiful. Its wooden body was covered with small scratches. The finish had faded. The strings looked old. One corner had clearly been repaired. But there was something about it that made the instrument feel important. The boy had placed a piece of cloth underneath it. He had even wiped the dust from the body. He wasn't treating it like something he wanted to get rid of. He was treating it like something he was afraid to lose. And that was exactly what it was. The guitar belonged to his father, a man who would never come home again. The boy had been sitting there for some time, waiting for someone to stop. Most people walked past. Some looked at the guitar. A few slowed down. Nobody bought it. Then a dark car stopped nearby. A man stepped out. He wore sunglasses and carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to being recognized everywhere he went. Except this time, something strange happened. Nobody rushed toward him. Nobody screamed. Nobody asked for an autograph. Because the little boy didn't know who he was. The man looked toward the guitar. He stopped. For a few seconds, he simply stared at it. Something about that worn instrument had caught his attention. Then he walked over. The boy looked up. The man pointed toward the guitar. How much for the guitar? The boy immediately told him the price. The man didn't react. Instead, he looked at the instrument again. Then at the boy. Where did you get it? The boy's expression changed. His eyes dropped toward the guitar. It was my dad's. The man's face became more serious. Your father's. The boy nodded. He used to play it. The man gently picked up the guitar. His fingers moved across the worn wood. There were years of history in those scratches. Years of music. Years of hands touching the same strings. He turned the guitar slightly. Then asked, "Does he still play?" The boy didn't answer. Not immediately. He stared at the ground. His lips pressed together. Then he quietly said, "No." The man looked at him. The boy swallowed. My dad died. For a moment, the noise of Los Angeles seemed to disappear. The man lowered his eyes. He had asked a simple question. He hadn't expected the answer to carry that much pain. He handed the guitar back slightly, but the boy shook his head. It's okay. The man remained silent. Then he asked, "Why are you selling it?" The boy looked at the guitar. His voice became quieter. "We need the money." That was all he said. But it was enough. There was no dramatic explanation. No long speech. Just a child trying to do something no child should have to do. Give up a piece of his father because his family needed to survive. The man looked at the guitar again. And suddenly, he wasn't looking at an old instrument. He was looking at a memory. He asked, "Did your father teach you to play?" The boy nodded. He taught me a little. Was he good? The boy smiled for the first time. He thought he was. The man laughed softly. The boy smiled too. Then the man asked, "What did he play?" The boy looked at the guitar. "He used to sing." "What kind of songs?" The boy hesitated, then answered, "Elvis songs." The man's expression changed. Just slightly. The boy didn't notice. The man looked down at the guitar. "Elvis?" The boy nodded. "My dad loved him." The man smiled. "What was his favorite?" The boy thought about it, then named one of Elvis Presley's famous songs. The man's eyes became distant. That song wasn't just familiar. It was part of his own life. He had sung it countless times. He had heard strangers sing it. He had heard fans scream it. But he had never expected to hear about it from a little boy standing on a sidewalk with his dead father's guitar. The boy continued, "My dad used to sing it at home." The man asked, "Did he sing it for you?" "Yeah." "What did he say about Elvis?" The boy smiled. "He said Elvis was the greatest singer he ever heard." The man looked away. For several seconds he said nothing. The boy didn't understand why. He simply thought the stranger was thinking about his father. And maybe he was. Because there are some compliments that sound different when they come from someone who isn't there anymore. Finally, the man looked back at the boy. "Your dad had good taste." The boy laughed. Then he asked an innocent question. A question that would change the entire moment. "Do you know Elvis?" The man smiled. "Yeah." The boy waited. "I know him pretty well." The boy's eyebrows rose. "Really?" The man nodded. "How?" The man looked at the guitar, then at the boy. And for the first time, there was something almost playful in his expression. He leaned slightly closer. "Because I'm Elvis." The boy froze. Completely. His smile disappeared. His eyes widened. He stared at the man, then at his sunglasses, then at his face, then back at the guitar. It was as though his brain was desperately trying to connect two completely different worlds. The man his father had talked about, the voice that had filled their home, the name he had heard hundreds of times, the man standing in front of him. "You're..." The boy stopped. He couldn't finish the sentence. The man smiled. The boy finally whispered, "Elvis Presley." The man nodded. The boy's face changed instantly. Shock. Disbelief. Then something deeper. He looked at the guitar again. And suddenly, the guitar didn't feel like just his father's anymore. It felt like the bridge between his father and the man his father had admired. The boy slowly looked back at Elvis. "You're really him." Elvis smiled. "Yeah." The boy didn't know what to say. Elvis could have made the moment about himself. He could have laughed. He could have posed for the people beginning to notice what was happening. But he didn't. Instead, he looked at the boy's hands, then at the guitar, and asked, "Can you play the song your dad used to sing?" The boy blinked. "Here." Elvis nodded. "Here." The boy looked around. People were beginning to slow down. Some had recognized Elvis. Others were simply curious. A few were already watching. But Elvis didn't look at them. He looked only at the boy. "Go ahead." The boy picked up the guitar. His hands trembled. He tried to hide it. He couldn't. Elvis noticed. "Don't be nervous." The boy gave a nervous smile. "I'm playing for Elvis." Elvis laughed quietly. "You're playing for your dad." The boy stopped. Those words hit him differently. He looked down at the guitar. His fingers moved slowly across the strings. He remembered his father sitting at home. The same guitar against his chest. The same worn wood. The same voice filling the room. For a second, the boy could almost hear him again. Then he placed his fingers on the strings. Elvis stepped back. The crowd grew quieter. A few people whispered his name. But Elvis raised one hand gently, as if telling everyone to be silent. The boy took a breath. His fingers moved. The first chord rang out. Elvis's expression changed. The sound was imperfect. The boy's fingers weren't steady. The guitar was old. The chord wasn't played perfectly. But Elvis didn't hear a mistake. He heard a father. He heard a home. He heard a little boy trying desperately to keep a memory alive. And as the boy prepared to sing the first line of his father's favorite Elvis song, Elvis realized something that made his chest tighten. This wasn't a guitar being sold anymore. It was the last piece of a man's voice that his son still had. And Elvis was about to hear that voice again, through the child who had inherited it. The first notes were shaky, not because the boy didn't know the song. He knew it. He had heard it too many times to forget. He had heard it in the kitchen. He had heard it in the living room. He had heard it late at night when his father thought everyone was asleep. But now, for the first time, the boy was playing it without him. And that changed everything. His fingers moved across the strings. One chord, then another. The old guitar gave a soft, slightly broken sound. The boy began to sing. His voice was small, not polished, not perfect, but honest. And the moment Elvis heard that first line, his expression changed. He didn't smile anymore. He simply listened. Because the boy wasn't trying to impress him. He wasn't performing for the crowd. He was remembering his father. The people standing nearby slowly stopped talking. Cars continued moving in the distance, but around that little circle, everything became strangely quiet. A woman passing by recognized Elvis. She stopped. Then another person stopped. Then another. Within moments, a small crowd had begun forming around the boy. But Elvis didn't seem to notice. His eyes remained fixed on the guitar. The boy continued singing. His voice trembled slightly on one line. He stopped. For a second, it looked as though he might forget the words. Elvis quietly said, "It's okay." The boy looked up. Elvis smiled. "Take your time." The boy nodded. Then he continued. And this time his voice was stronger. Elvis listened without interrupting. He had performed in front of enormous crowds. He had stood beneath thousands of lights. He had heard entire stadiums sing his songs back to him. But this was different. There was no stage here. No orchestra. No microphones. No screaming fans. Just a little boy. An old guitar. And a song his father had loved. When the boy finished the first part, he lowered his head. He looked embarrassed. "Sorry." Elvis frowned slightly. "For what?" "I messed up." Elvis shook his head. "No." The boy looked at him. "You didn't." Elvis pointed toward the guitar. "Your dad taught you that." The boy nodded. "Yeah." "Then you did just fine." The boy smiled. But then his smile disappeared again. He looked at the guitar. "My dad used to play it better." Elvis took a breath. "I bet he did." The boy looked at him. "You think so?" Elvis nodded. I know so. The boy smiled. For the first time since Elvis had approached him, he looked less like a child trying to sell something, and more like a son remembering someone he loved. Then Elvis asked, "What was your dad like?" The boy's fingers rested against the guitar. "He was funny." Elvis smiled. "Funny? Yeah." The boy looked down. He always made up words when he forgot the lyrics. A few people in the crowd laughed softly. The boy continued, "And he used to play this guitar when Mom was cooking." Elvis listened. He'd sing too loud. The boy laughed. Mom would tell him to stop. Elvis laughed. "And did he?" The boy shook his head. "Never." The crowd smiled. But then the boy's expression changed. He stopped after he got sick. Elvis became quiet. The boy continued speaking. After that, he couldn't play as much. He ran his hand over the guitar. But sometimes he'd still pick it up, even when he was tired. "Yeah." The boy's voice became quieter. He said it helped him forget that he was sick. Elvis looked away for a moment. The story was becoming heavier. The guitar wasn't simply something the father had owned. It had been part of the man's final years. His companion. His escape. His way of giving his son something to remember. Elvis slowly asked, "What did he say about you?" The boy looked surprised. "About me?" "Yeah." The boy smiled. "He said I was going to be a better guitar player than him." Elvis nodded. "Sounds like he believed in you." The boy's eyes became wet. "He did." A long silence followed. Then the boy wiped his face quickly. He didn't want anyone to see him crying. Elvis noticed. He didn't mention it. Instead, he looked toward the guitar. "Play another part." The boy smiled. "Another one?" "Yeah." "You want to hear it?" Elvis nodded. "I do." The boy adjusted the guitar. Then he began again. This time, the crowd was completely silent. People who had been walking past were now standing still. Someone whispered, "That's Elvis." Another person whispered, "That's really Elvis." But Elvis didn't acknowledge them. He sat down beside the boy. And when the boy started singing again, Elvis quietly joined in. The crowd gasped. It was subtle at first. Just a few words. Then Elvis's voice became clearer. The boy stopped playing for half a second. He looked at Elvis in disbelief. Elvis smiled. "Keep going." The boy laughed nervously. Then he continued. And suddenly, the sidewalk became a stage. Not the kind Elvis was used to. Something much smaller. Much more human. A boy and the man whose songs his father had loved. They sang together. The boy played the guitar. Elvis sang beside him. And for those few moments, the crowd didn't matter. The cameras didn't matter. Fame didn't matter. There was only the song. When they reached the end of the verse, the boy stopped. He stared at Elvis. "You really know it." Elvis laughed. "I should." The boy smiled. Then he asked, "Did you write it?" Elvis nodded. The boy's eyes widened again. "You did?" "Yeah." The boy looked down at the guitar. "My dad really loved your songs." Elvis's smile softened. "I can tell." The boy was quiet for a moment. Then he asked something that caught Elvis completely off guard. "Did you ever meet my dad?" Elvis didn't answer immediately. The boy looked at him. "I mean before." Elvis slowly shook his head. "No." The boy nodded. He seemed disappointed. Elvis looked at him. But I wish I had. The boy looked up. Elvis continued. He sounds like someone I would have liked. The boy smiled through his tears. He would have loved you. Elvis smiled. I think I would have liked him too. Another silence. Then Elvis looked at the guitar. What's his name? The boy told him. Elvis repeated the name quietly, as if trying to memorize it. Then he asked, did he have a favorite Elvis song? The boy nodded. The one you just sang. Elvis looked down. There was something almost painful in his expression. A man he had never met had once sat in a home somewhere in Los Angeles, holding the same kind of guitar, singing Elvis's song to his family. And now that man's son was sitting beside Elvis, playing the very same song. It was a strange circle. One Elvis could never have planned. Then the boy suddenly looked at the guitar. I don't really want to sell it. Elvis looked at him. I know, but we need the money. Elvis nodded slowly. How much did you say? The boy repeated the price. Elvis reached into his pocket. The boy watched. But before Elvis could hand him anything, the boy shook his head. No. Elvis paused. What? I can't take more than the guitar is worth. Elvis smiled. Who said I'm paying you more than it's worth? The boy looked confused. Elvis glanced at the guitar. I'm paying for what it means. The boy didn't understand. But before he could ask, Elvis placed the money into his hand. The boy stared at it. Then at Elvis. Then at the guitar. He suddenly looked frightened. I can't take this. Elvis gently closed the boy's fingers around the money. Yes, you can. But. Elvis shook his head. No, but. The boy's eyes filled with tears again. Elvis stood. For a moment, it seemed as though the moment was over. The crowd had grown larger now. People were whispering. Some were taking pictures. Some were simply watching. Then Elvis looked down at the guitar. He reached for it. The boy handed it over. Elvis held it for a few seconds. He examined the scratches one more time. Then he looked at the boy. And something unexpected happened. Instead of putting the guitar under his arm, Elvis held it out, back toward the boy. The boy stared at him. What's wrong? Elvis smiled. I changed my mind. The boy was confused. But you wanted to buy it. I did. Then why are you giving it back? Elvis looked directly into his eyes. Because some things aren't meant to be sold. The boy stood completely still. Elvis continued. This guitar belonged to your father. He gently placed it back into the boy's hands. You keep it. The boy stared at the guitar. But you already gave me the money. Elvis nodded. That's for your family. The boy looked at the money. Then back at Elvis. You're giving me both. Elvis smiled. I'm giving you a chance to keep your father's guitar. The boy couldn't speak. His eyes filled with tears. He hugged the guitar tightly against his chest. Elvis placed a hand gently on his shoulder. Every time you play it. He paused. Remember your father. The boy nodded. Elvis stepped away. The crowd watched him. But before Elvis turned around, the boy called out, Mr. Presley. Elvis stopped. He turned. The boy held the guitar against his chest. Can I play it again? Elvis smiled. Of course. The boy sat down. He placed his fingers on the strings. Elvis watched. The crowd became silent again. The boy began playing. And Elvis stood there listening. But this time, He wasn't listening to his own song. He was listening to a son, keeping his father's memory alive. And as the melody drifted through the Lowe's Angel Street, Elvis realized something he would carry with him long after he left. Sometimes a person doesn't need to buy something to own its meaning. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is making sure they never have to sell the memory they love. But neither Elvis nor the boy knew that one final moment was still waiting for them. Because before Elvis walked away, the boy was going to say something that would make the king stop one last time. And this time, it wouldn't be about the guitar. Elvis had already taken a few steps away. The crowd was still gathered around the boy. People were whispering his name. Some were staring at Elvis. Others were watching the little boy holding his father's old guitar. But Elvis wasn't looking back. He thought the moment was over. Then he heard a small voice behind him. "Mr. Presley." Elvis stopped. He turned around. The boy was still sitting on the sidewalk. The guitar rested against his chest. His eyes were wet. But this time he wasn't crying. He was smiling. Elvis walked back toward him. "What is it?" The boy hesitated. Then he asked, "Would you sing it with me?" Elvis looked at him. For a moment he said nothing. The crowd became completely silent. The boy continued, "The song my dad used to sing." He looked down at the guitar. "I want to hear it one more time." Elvis slowly smiled. Then he sat down beside him. "Okay." The boy's eyes widened. "Really?" Elvis nodded. "Really?" The crowd reacted immediately. A few people gasped. Someone whispered, "He's actually going to sing." But Elvis raised his hand. "Let the boy play." And suddenly, everyone became quiet. The boy adjusted the guitar. His fingers were still trembling. Elvis leaned toward him. "Remember what I told you." The boy looked at him. "Don't be nervous." Elvis smiled. "No." He pointed gently toward the guitar. "Play it for your dad." The boy took a deep breath. Then his fingers touched the strings. The first chord rang through the street. This time it sounded different. The same old guitar. The same worn wood. The same scratched body. But now it carried something much bigger. A memory. A father. A son. And a song that had somehow brought them together. The boy began singing. His voice was quiet. But after a few seconds, Elvis joined him. The sound of Elvis's voice stopped the entire street. People turned. Cars slowed. Someone across the road recognized him and froze. The whisper moved through the crowd. "Elvis. He's singing." That's Elvis Presley. But Elvis didn't look at the cameras. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked at the boy. And the boy looked at the guitar. They continued. The little boy played every chord his father had taught him. Elvis sang every word he knew by heart. And something extraordinary happened. The boy began to smile. Not because he was standing next to a superstar. Not because strangers were watching. But because, for the first time since his father's death, he felt like he wasn't completely alone. For a few minutes, it almost felt as though his father was there. Somewhere nearby. Listening. The boy's fingers moved across the strings. Then he reached a part of the song where his father had always changed the rhythm. The boy did the same thing. Elvis noticed. He smiled. "You do that just like him." The boy stopped. "You remember?" Elvis nodded. "No." He smiled. "I remember you doing it." The boy laughed. Then they continued. The crowd was completely captivated. No one was shouting. No one was pushing forward. Nobody wanted to interrupt. Even the people who had recognized Elvis seemed to understand that this wasn't really an Elvis Presley performance. It belonged to the boy. And it belonged to his father. When the final notes came, the boy slowly lifted his fingers from the strings. Silence. For one heartbeat. Two. Then the crowd erupted in applause. But Elvis didn't stand. He remained beside the boy. The boy looked at him. Then quietly said, "My dad would have loved this." Elvis lowered his eyes. His face changed. For the first time that afternoon, the superstar disappeared. There was no stage persona. No famous smile. No performer. Just a man sitting beside a grieving child. Elvis reached out and placed his hand gently on the boy's shoulder. "I think he would have." The boy looked at the guitar. "I wish he could have heard you." Elvis took a slow breath. "So do I." The boy wiped his eyes. Then he asked, "Do you think he can hear me when I play it?" Elvis looked at him. There was a long pause. Then he answered carefully, "I think when you play it." He touched the guitar. "You're carrying a piece of him with you." The boy looked down at the instrument. Elvis continued, "And as long as you keep playing." He paused. "He's never really gone." The boy held the guitar tighter. The crowd became quiet again. Some people looked away, wiping their eyes. Even strangers who had stopped only because they recognized Elvis were now emotionally connected to a story they hadn't expected to witness. Then Elvis stood. He looked at the boy one last time. "Promise me something." The boy nodded. "What?" "Don't sell it." The boy smiled. "I won't. Even when you're older." "I won't. Even if someone offers you a lot of money." The boy laughed through his tears. "I won't." Elvis smiled. "Good." He started walking away. But the boy suddenly called after him, "Mr. Presley." Elvis turned. The boy lifted the guitar. "I'll learn to play it better." Elvis smiled. "I know you will." Then he added, "And one day." He pointed toward the guitar. "Someone is going to hear you play this and ask where you learned." The boy smiled. "What should I tell them?" Elvis looked at him. "Tell them your father taught you." The boy nodded. Elvis turned away. This time he really began walking. The crowd slowly parted. People watched him disappear toward the waiting car. But just before he reached it, Elvis stopped. He looked back. The boy was still there. Still holding the guitar. Still watching him. Elvis raised one hand. The boy raised his hand back. Then Elvis got into the car. The door closed. The car began moving. The boy watched until it disappeared into the distance. For several seconds, he stood completely still. Then he looked down at the guitar. His father's guitar. The guitar he had almost sold. The guitar he had believed he would have to give away just to help his family. He slowly sat down again. His fingers touched the strings. And he played the first chord. Again. Then another. And another. This time, he wasn't playing because he needed money. He wasn't playing because someone was watching. He wasn't playing for Elvis. He was playing for his father. The melody drifted through the street. People who were still nearby stopped to listen. And somewhere far down the road, Elvis heard the faint sound of the guitar disappear behind him. He looked through the car window. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he quietly smiled. because Elvis had arrived that afternoon thinking he might buy an old guitar. He left without it, but he took something else with him. A reminder. A reminder that music isn't measured by the price of an instrument. It isn't measured by the size of the audience. And it isn't measured by fame. Sometimes music is simply the last thing a father leaves behind. A sound, a memory, a melody passed from one generation to another. And sometimes, all it takes is one person to stop and listen, to keep that memory alive. The boy had thought he was selling his father's guitar that day. He didn't know he was about to meet the man whose voice had once filled his father's home. He didn't know the stranger asking about the guitar was the very singer his father admired. And Elvis didn't know he was about to meet a child carrying the memory of a man he had never met. But perhaps that's what made the moment so powerful. Elvis didn't buy the guitar. He bought something much more important. He bought the boy time. He gave his family a way forward. And he gave the boy permission to keep the one thing that connected him to his father. The guitar remained in the boy's hands. The money helped his family. And the song remained in the air long after Elvis had gone. Years later, whenever that boy touched those worn strings, he would remember that afternoon. He would remember the man who stopped. The man who listened. The man who could have taken the guitar, but chose to give it back. And most of all, he would remember the words Elvis left him with. Every time you play it, remember your father. Because that day wasn't really about Elvis Presley. It wasn't even about the guitar. It was about a father whose voice had disappeared, but whose music was still alive. It was about a son who almost had to let go of the last piece of him. And a stranger who understood that some memories are simply too valuable to sell. And somewhere in Los Angeles, long after the crowd disappeared and the street returned to normal, the old guitar kept playing. One chord, then another, and another. A son's hand on the strings, a father's memory in every note, and a song that, for one unforgettable afternoon, brought them all together.